Hi, everybody. It's John Umhafer from Wisconsin Cheesemakers Association. Welcome to the Dairy Food Safety Alliance webinar. We're going to rush right into this because there's a lot to talk about. The number one issue that we see people facing in this coronavirus environment is workforce safety, workforce issues, and we're going to take those head on in this with our partners from Dairy Farmers of Wisconsin and Center for Dairy Research.
Hello everyone, it's Marianne. Glad you're all here today, and hopefully you'll get some valuable information from this webinar today. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them, and Anna will do her best to answer them for you.
Yes, and I'll second that, Marianne. This is Adam from DFW. We very much appreciate you taking the time to participate in the webinar, and hopefully you'll walk away with some useful information you can use at each of your facilities.
We'll be going through both of the SOPs first. Some people may already be familiar with the first SOP, which is what to do when an employee is suspected or confirmed to have COVID-19. This also includes best practices for employee safety in your plants. Standard operating procedure number 2 is brand new, and you should have received it via email earlier today in our reminder of the call. It will also be up on the WCMA website. I can confirm it is already there, and we'll be sending this out via a member bulletin today as well. This is when a COVID-19 positive employee returns to work. We know that some people are already in that boat, and we want to make sure that they're following best practices for that. We'll cover a number of hot topics, 4 in particular that we're receiving many questions about: employee monitoring best practices. This includes things before they enter the plant each day for their shift. We'll be covering face masks, disinfection practices, and shutdown times. There are a lot of questions related to how long a plant might shut down if there was a COVID positive, and we know that there's conflicting information out there, so we're going to try to make that more clear for all of you. Then we'll go through Q&A that was submitted in advance, and finally point you to some industry resources. So Marianne's going to begin with our first SOP, and if we just click on the image there, Sarah, the Dairy Food Safety Alliance, that will pull up our SOP template. And Marianne will be sharing, pulling out specific information that many of you had questions about over the last few weeks.
All right, thanks Rebecca and Sarah. Just so you can look at the SOP regarding COVID-19 positive worker, I would move to section, Sarah, and move to section 4.0. You could, thank you. Some of the things that you should keep in mind is with safety. So we put together these 6 items, and something you should take a look at and follow through on it is 4.1. What is your current plant safety policy and good manufacturing practices? Do they meet the federal and state and corporate regulations? 2, does everybody have the appropriate protective equipment to wear? And we're going to get into that in a little bit more detail later. Does everybody know how to perform proper hand washing procedures? Do you have a policy for that? And if you're wearing gloves and hairnets and beer nets, what policies do you have in place for that? So make sure all the employees understand the importance of why it's important to wash your hands and sanitize your hands before you go to work. Hopefully there's signage in bathrooms and kitchens and locker rooms and everywhere else in your facility. Here's one we've been getting a lot of questions on: what do visitors, contract workers, temporary workers, and routine delivery personnel, do they adhere to your corporate policies? So you need to take a look at what your plant visitation policy is, and does it address those workers or those visitors that come in, temporary, routine delivery guys, contract workers, and such. And if it's mandated to be in your policy, then they should be wearing the proper PPE also in that facility. 4.5, do you have enough soap and hand sanitizer present for the workers to utilize? Do they know how to wash their hands, and what are the procedures for that? Temperature monitoring of employees should take place prior to entering the facility. Again, do you have the capability to test their temperature before they walk into the building. And if they have a temperature over 100.4, they should not be allowed into the processing facility. So just some things that we wanted to consider. We added recently the usage of face masks in the office and processing environment should align with the CDC recommendations. So we added that because of the change that CDC just came out with that. So next would be 5.16, Sarah. Thank you. Continue to maintain contact with the afflicted employee to ensure their health and well-being while away from the facility. So checking on your employees if they are out, you know, what are you doing to check on them? Are you keeping in contact with them to see how they're doing outside of the facility? So something to consider there. The next section is 5.28 that I wanted to highlight. Thoroughly clean and sanitize areas that employees came in contact with during their time in a facility. So what deep cleaning are you doing with the employees who come into those particular areas? And how often are you doing it? How often are you cleaning and sanitizing and disinfecting those areas? So make sure if there is somebody who had a COVID positive that you're doing a full cleaning and sanitation of that area during the time that they were in the facility. 529 is the next one. And then again, continue to maintain contact with an employee to ensure their health and well-being while away from the facility. I'm sure it's pretty scary for them, what they're going through. Just, you know, maintain that contact to see how they're doing for that. And then 5.37, you know, how are you verifying that all the employees are within a 6-foot radius of the afflicted employee? What verification steps are you doing to verify that you've checked that area within 6 feet of where that employee was working? And are you documenting that you're checking those? And how often are you checking that for that if employees are in that next to each other? You need a verification step for that to verify that those are within a 6-foot radius of that employee. Next is 537. Okay, we did that one, I'm sorry. Next one is 5.311. And that, again, talks about the deep cleaning and the sanitation on the processing area in accordance with CDC. You know, keep in mind that aerosols can stay, of the COVID can stay, last up to 3 hours. If you have any copper in your facility, it can last up to 4 hours on the surface. Cardboard has been found up to 24 hours, the COVID can last, and stainless steel is up to 3 days. So what do you do for that? So we included some procedures in here, 5311.1, 11.2, and then 11.3, which really talks about the cleaning and sanitation chemicals that are EPA registered. There's a list on the EPA site called the N list of chemicals that can be used to ensure that you can eliminate against the COVID virus. So take a look at that list. It's updated almost daily. The last count I've seen on there are 392 chemicals that can be utilized to eliminate the COVID virus. So take a look at the N list. A lot of you already have some of these cleaning compounds in your facility, so just verify. I would check with your chemical rep also to see what they would recommend for that, for the cleaning and sanitation and disinfection of the hard surfaces in other areas. 53116, I page down a little bit. Thank you, Sarah. Just talking about the non-processing areas utilized by the employee should also be cleaned and sanitized. So again, what are you doing in those areas to make sure you have good cleaning and sanitation, and how often are you doing that? So if you're in a break room, or if you're in a locker room, or if you're in a hallway or things like that, how often are you cleaning and sanitizing those areas that employees may have touched? So you need to implement a program for that. So that was it for what I had for the SOP, some highlighted areas I thought were key to take a look at during this, for this SOP. So Adam, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Actually, Mary Ann, we did have one clarifying question on that as well, and it was related to the very last section, section 5, but related to how long an employee should stay at home monitoring. And I believe there was a reference to 72 hours. And because we have other questions on this, could we pull that up one last time? And Mary Ann, could you walk us through that section?
Sure.
Regarding
5.1.
confirmed positive.
Yeah.
5.4.
Yep. It's been, recommended that they should stay home a minimum of 72 hours until they have they're fever-free, which is a 100.4, without using any fever-reducing medication. So if they're not showing any signs of coughing or shortness of breath, then, and at least 7 days have passed since symptoms first appear. This has been changing quite often, and it's very fluid right now. We've heard 14 days, we've heard 7 days, we've heard 5 days, some folks. It's whatever the plan has deemed what is necessary. These are just some guidelines that we put in there that you may want to implement. Don't know if that answered your question, Rebecca.
I think so, yes. So I think we'll begin to go into our hot off the presses return to work SOP, and Adam's going to lead us in this.
All right, so since this is a new SOP, I will probably hit all the areas very briefly just to kind of walk you through the thought process here. So Sarah, we'll start at the beginning and work our way to the end. So for this SOP, we want to include the scope 2 specific scenarios. One scenario is if an employee is returning to work after recovery from the illness. So they're returning from work, single employee or 2 employees, something like that. The second scenario is if multiple employees are returning to work after a shutdown and deep clean of the facility. Because we've seen it in the meat plants that when they reopen, there's a large number of people coming in. So similar policies, but they're 2 different scenarios. Sarah will keep scrolling through section 2.
And I'm with you now.
Update that we, oh, I'm sorry.
This is Rebecca. I'm with you now.
Oh, okay, perfect. Okay, perfect. Okay, thank you, Rebecca. The only thing we really added here was making sure that we work with the Department of Health Services as well as an external partner, which we didn't have in the first SOP, but it's important that we continue to work with them and utilize some of the tools they have available, which we'll talk about later. You'll see that equipment and supplies. One question that comes up often is this concept of non-contact thermometers, face masks, and face shields. What should we have in place? Those are things that we'll dive into later, but just some things that you need to think about in terms of equipment. On the safety aspect, a lot of this, the first 4 sections are pulled directly from OSHA, talking about the different kinds of controls, engineering controls, administrative controls, and 4.12, safe work practices, which is where we spend a lot of time, I feel, in the plants. What practices, how do we develop a culture of personal hygiene, and then training and reinforcement of those best practices. The main point is if we're going to implement procedures, we have to make sure we actually follow them and we document that. So for the group here, I'm not as concerned because we all come from that field of you have to document to make sure, obviously, that we have our records. And then personal protection equipment. So the thing I will call out for all of the PPE we have is selection should be based upon the hazard to the worker, and it should be fitted. I don't know how many people, whether it's in the plant or on TV or out and about, if you're going to wear a mask or something, wear it properly. Otherwise, it doesn't ensure any mitigation of the risk. So we need to make sure we're following that. Again, there's some tools we'll discuss later. And just make sure everything is in accordance with your GMPs and the manufacturer recommendations. Failure to do this basic stuff gives you a suboptimal risk mitigation program. A lot of this from 4.2 to about 4.7, same as the first SOP you saw, but we did add in 4.8. Remember, if you're going to use thermometers, that you should follow a procedure and that you should have a form. And the same thing for sanitation, if you're going to use it. Now, they're non-contact, but it's a good idea to have a procedure and a form ensuring that you have sanitized the equipment. Ensure procedures are in place for face masks, section 4.10. Again, if we're going to use them, great. Make sure they fit properly. We can use or a cloth face mask, and then proper disposal. We see it often on the retail side. People are just throwing things in the parking lot. We don't want that at our facilities either. And then make sure that you've read the first SOP, talking a little bit about addressing a COVID positive 19 worker. So those are some prerequisite type, this is what we need to do. Now we'll jump a little bit into the procedure. On the procedure side, obviously, if we have symptomatic employees, we don't want them to come to work. Section 5.2, we start talking about recovered employees, whether they are confirmed positive or unconfirmed. Let's say they did not get a test, but that has been outside of the facility between 2 to 14 days. 2 to 14 days is based on the current incubation period put out by CDC. So that's where that number comes from. Is asymptomatic, so meaning they don't have the cough, they don't have a fever, and their doctor or a medical provider has provided them with a document. You can return to work. They're asymptomatic. They're beyond that time period of, being symptomatic, which in this case is that incubation period of 2 to 14 days. Just reemphasize the importance of proper hygiene, retrain, and right now, there is no need at this point for that employee to wear a mask in the facility. If they do choose to wear a mask, there are cloth masks, there are single-use masks. Both are available as long as they comply with GMPs. Based on some research, again, I'll talk about this later, after that 14-day period, as long as they're asymptomatic, the rate of transmission has generally dropped. The most transmissible time period from what I've seen is that period where they go from asymptomatic to symptomatic. After that, research studies out of China, the University of Texas, Columbia University, they have all shown that the risk of transmission is reduced. Now, that's as of today. I can't guarantee that will be forever, but at this point, if the employee is given a clean bill of health, they do not need to formally wear that mask. Now, if the recovered employee has not had sign-off from a medical provider, obviously very similar, they're asymptomatic, you could let them back in the facility, retrain, follow proper hygiene, but it may be your policy that you want to look and see if they have a fever. If they have a fever, you can implement that as part of your program. They should not enter the facility. And then there's no need for the employee to wear a mask. If they choose to wear a mask, cloth masks are acceptable. So in both scenarios, you have an asymptomatic employee that has returned to work. Obviously, if they have a fever, don't let them in. If they're not showing symptoms, fine. But if they've been beyond that 14-day mark, and they're asymptomatic, the rate of transmission is relatively low, okay? Again, that's a recommendation. It is not, if you feel more comfortable with them wearing a mask, that is up to you. I'm based off of the studies I've seen now, this is where we're at. If there is a multi-day shutdown, as you've seen with the meat plants, some of the meat plants, and they have done a deep clean, this takes a little more detail. because you probably don't have all the information you need. So make sure that the employees are asymptomatic when they return to work. You may wish to implement temperature monitoring, but if anybody has a fever or they're expressing symptoms, don't enter the facility. If you do choose to take temperatures, make sure you have it documented and make sure you know, continue to watch those trends, okay? You could also include additional clarifying questions, which has been put out by DHS and CDC. So do you, at the same time you take the temperatures, you can ask these 3 questions. There are others. These were the 3 most important. Obviously, 5.4.1.33, have you been in contact with a confirmed positive COVID individual within the last week? These are all questions that could be asked, or you could direct them to, if they want to do this before they show up at the facility, you could go to wisconsinhealthconnect.com and fill out that survey, and we'll discuss that later. If you decide to implement a mask policy for all employees or employees that are high risk, there are a couple different options. One is, no matter what you pick, make sure you know how to wear, maintain, and clean the mask. If it's a single-use mask, make sure that you're following manufacturing recommendations and it's in compliance with your GMPs. In most cases, I think the company would want to provide these, similar to as you would hairnets or booties for people walking through the plant. Do not use the reuse single-use masks. Get rid of them. Make sure they're properly disposed of. Cloth masks, again, you could have 2 different options here depending on the company. Some may provide them as part of a company. I've heard of some reimbursing the purchase of cloth masks, a couple different scenarios. Just make sure they're clean and in good condition. If the company has the ability to keep the mask on site and launder them, they should consider that. If they don't, the CDC has said that you can take them home and wash them in the washer. If you decide you could have a captive shoe policy, similar to your captive shoe policy, so use, 5.4.3 and 4.4 talks a little bit about use. Cloth mask by the employee, that's fine. They can bring it in, just make sure it's in good condition and they can be taken home to be laundered. The other question that has come up is some companies may choose to use a face shield or a face shield in conjunction with a face mask to prevent some of the aerosol droplets or to stop it. If you're going to use a face mask in addition to a face shield, just make sure it's not inhibiting the effectiveness of the face mask. If we can't use it properly, this is no good. Now that we also have face shields, we have to keep them clean and they have to be properly working. So that means the SOP development. And then make sure that you're cleaning and sanitizing them at least once per shift or at the designated frequency provided by the manufacturer. So that goes into some detail and recommendations on the different masks. And then if you have an employee, and I've seen this with some companies on the national level, if employees are considered high risk, meaning they are in very close contact with employees where social distancing is not possible, or they have a major underlying health condition, they may wear a mask at the company discretion, or if they have major concerns, it's always best to work with them and potentially reallocate to another role where their risk of being within that social distancing, if you can't have the social distancing, perhaps you can move them to another area. Not always possible, but in order to reduce the risk to the employee, that's what we would like to do. The contractor and visitor practices, this was a really good question that we hear too. It's very similar to what we would do with an employee. Yes, they should be screened because they are also part of it. They have the potential to be carriers, so yes, they should be screened. They need to follow the same rules as everybody else because otherwise we put our employees at risk. So I would recommend, based on this, we'd recommend single-use masks for them, similar to if you have FDA or USDA come in, here's your single-use booties hairnet, and a mask. Make sure they follow the rules. My personal preference is not allowing them to use a cloth mask, just because you don't know where it's been. You don't know with your employees either, but since they're in there for a short period of time, the single-use mask makes more sense. And that covers contractors and visitors. I think given the situation we have now, most contractors, visitors, and regulatory officials are going to comply by the rules. If they don't, we can always address that as needed as an industry. 543 has just some basic startup practices. Obviously, this varies from plant to plant, but make sure you've got those engineering and controls in place. You adhere to social distancing guidelines. Make sure you're cleaning and sanitation. If that's going to be part of your steps after a shutdown, make sure it's all there and sign it on file. If you don't have it completed, find out what happened, because it needs to be done. It needs to be on file. You need to show that you cleaned and sanitized, a deep clean and sanitize after reopening. And then obviously 544 is very similar to what you saw before. Mary Ann mentioned EPA registered disinfectants. All this information was pretty much kept the same from the previous spec. And just make sure that your sanitation program and documents are all signed off. This form also included some additional resources. So forms, definitions, those can be filled out at your discretion. But if we skip down to 8.0 references, we have information for the CDC with direct links there, FDA, USDA, EPA, all the way down. Wisconsin resources for all the different Wisconsin organizations, and then some additional resources that can be shared with the remainder of the SOP following a similar format. The intent was to keep these similar from the industry. So with that, I know some of these questions will be asked later, but if you have anything specific to the SOP, happy to provide some additional insight if needed.
Yeah, Adam, we do have a clarifying question. It's a good one. Are there HIPAA concerns with recording employee temperatures? I have heard conflicting information on whether or not it should be documented. We'll start with that question first. I'll say that based on documents we've also made available on employee rights and employer responsibilities, you would want to keep all of those documents private. And you would also want to implement temperature taking across the board. Because if you do take temperatures for certain people and not for others, you could be accused, you could have a case against you on discrimination. So Adam, is there anything you want to add to that regarding HIPAA concerns on recording employee temperatures?
No, I think you've covered it, Rebecca. Very good points there. I think for record keeping purposes, as long as you keep it private and you meet the requirement, that's acceptable. But honestly, if you did not document anything, you've really got nothing to go on then. That creates another issue. You have a way to screen. So yes, follow the guidelines per Rebecca's choice. Do not be selective. Implement as you need to meet those requirements.
Okay, another clarifying question. How should we handle truck drivers coming into the facility to pick up or take loads? I think this falls under the SOP section on contractors and visitor practices. The question is also, do they wear masks and get temperature checks as well? And how do you communicate that to all the over-the-road carriers in this requirement?
I would say, I mean, they are a contractor and vendor as well. I know in the past, we always had truck drivers wear booties and hairnets at a minimum, and they could be a carrier. I believe in this case, it would depend on the risk that the company is willing to take. If that person is going to be in the facility interacting with people for an extended amount of time, I would recommend you make that universal and just say, yes, you have to wear a mask and we have to check. But at the same time, it gets into that low risk, high risk, medium risk, and how the contact is between those employees. I believe a lot of third-party logistics companies have been agreeing to these things, have been agreeing to the companies. I don't know, have you, I would ask Rebecca, Marianne, and John on this one maybe. I've heard most people coming in are adhering to the policies in place by the company.
Yeah, Adam, what I'm hearing from calls is that anyone coming into the facility must adhere to the safety protocols in place. It doesn't matter how long they're inside the facility, doesn't matter what their role is inside the facility, whether they're a regulator, a truck driver, a vendor of some sort, everyone must follow the policy across the board.
I would echo.
Sorry, Marianne, can you repeat that?
I'm sorry, I would echo that. Whatever the policy is, all those visitors must abide by it.
All right. I want to remind people that if they do have any clarifying questions, they can enter that into the chat, which you'll see sort of at the bottom of your screen. There's a little bowl that says chat under it, and you can enter your questions there, and people will not be seeing your questions. Next, though, we will continue on with our agenda. We're going to move on to hot topics, and the first hot topic is employee monitoring best practices. So we'll share that, and we'll get to our bullets on that.
All right, the first item was the personal hygiene and sanitation, and we kind of covered some of that with fever, what symptoms you should be looking for in an employee, like chills or cough, shortness of breath. Are they tired? They have muscle pains, you know, headaches, loss of sensory taste. So you need to, you know, check their personal hygiene. Physical distancing, we talked about that, you know, keep within a 6-foot radius if possible. You know, I've seen some plans where they may just have one way coming in and one way going out. So, you know, have you modified your shifts so you don't have people real close to each other, one another, so you can maintain that 6-foot distance? And again, how do you verify and make sure that they're doing that? So you're going to keep that in mind, what you're going to do for that. Again, we talked a lot about the PPE for employees. Adam did a good job of sharing that in the last SOP for that. What is the company policy? So whatever the company policy is for PPE, you should honor those, that policy. Cleaning, disinfecting. Does everybody understand the difference between cleaning and disinfecting? You know, cleaning refers to removal of dirt, cleaning germs from surfaces. Cleaning alone does not kill germs. Disinfecting, that's when you're going to use chemicals, for example, whatever is on that end list from EPA, on those registered disinfectants to kill the germs on surfaces. So keep in mind there's a difference between cleaning, sanitizing, and disinfection. And then if you do have someone who was positive in your plan, or just in general, what deep cleaning of the facility are you doing, and what have you implemented to ensure you have a deep cleaning so there's no anything present on those hard surfaces and in those break rooms and in those areas that get touched a lot. So what practices have you implemented to make sure you have a good clean and sanitation program for your facility, and how often are you doing that? So just some highlights of, you know, what you could be doing in your facility for employee best practices to prevent.
Yeah, Marianne, we do have this is triggered a question from the group. The question is, if we get a COVID positive in our plant and we look on videotapes to see who is within 6 feet, Is there a time duration recommended? That is, if a person passes the employee who tests positive for COVID-19 in a hallway, is that reason to send the passerby home? If not, what guidance is there for the duration of contact within 6 feet? So I think we'll, we can dive into this a little bit more in some of the Q&A that we have, but I think the primary question here is, if there's a COVID positive in the plant, do we need to send anyone within sort of a nearby vicinity home?
Well, you're not going to see symptoms right away, but if you know that person's positive and they were within 6 feet, you may want to monitor that person. They may be asymptomatic, they may be symptomatic, we don't know. It's going to be on a case-by-case basis how you determine that. And I don't know if we have the right answers to answer that question right now, but you got to assess the situation and you got to determine, is it worth the risk to have that person in your facility or not?
I also want to note that if you have a COVID positive in your plant, you're going to be contacted, at least in Wisconsin, by your county health department, and
Correct.
They will also be giving you direct guidance. And if you have a question about a particular scenario where an employee was in some vicinity of someone who tested positive for COVID-19, you can ask them that question directly, and they'll help you make the right call.
Right, and again, it's on a case-by-case basis.
That's right. So work with your county health department in the event of a COVID positive. Let us know if you're encountering challenges or if you feel that there's challenges from the regulators as well. We're going to move on to our next hot topic, and that is face masks. Lots of questions about this right now.
Yes, masks are a really hot topic. So this one, if you have, and I've seen these out and about, the single-use masks, use them as you need to. Again, going back to follow the proper cleaning, disposal, obviously for this one, disposal protocol. If you decide on cloth masks, there is a CDC reference at the end on how to clean them. Employees can take them home and clean them. The question there is, how do you verify they're clean? Some will choose to do on site and just keep it there if they can. The important thing is to follow all that information that's given to you, and there's plenty of it out there through the CDC website. Employees, obviously, with employees, you have a little more control over the face mask policy, and that's up to you. And then for contractors and visitors, I think we referenced it before, it's important that they follow the policies. I'm not hearing too much rumbling about visitors and contractors not following them, but you need to follow the guidelines. And then, as always, make sure everything fits properly and that it's in good working condition. And at the end, again, there's a good reference on the DIY cloth face mask coverings provided by CDC, which is a very useful document. And it gives you some insight into what you could do for a cloth face mask.
All right, moving on. Next hot topic, disinfection practices. Mary Ann?
Yeah, we went through the definitions of cleaning and disinfecting, so keep in mind what those are. Work with your chemical rep to understand what compounds, cleaning compounds you can use, and sanitation compounds and disinfecting compounds to utilize in your facility. Each facility is a little different, so you each gotta clean and sanitize and disinfect it a little differently. You know, how to clean and disinfect it, again, work with your chem rep to utilize their experience, their knowledge, to get that information out to work in your facility, because what is done in one facility may not necessarily work in another facility, so know that. And then educate your staff regarding policies for worker protection. You know, what can they do? What should they be wearing? What are their rights for working in a facility for that? You know, do they have the proper PPE? Do they have the distancing? Do they have all those things in place? And again, just to reiterate, look at the EPA list of the N list for disinfectants. A lot of you are using those chemicals right now. So and they're targeted to work with SARS-CoV-2. So take a look at that list. Again, it's changing all the time. Like I said, there's 392 of them on there right now, but look at that, work with your chem rep and ask them, what can we do to help prevent the COVID from spreading? So
we have a good question in chat right now, but I'm gonna press pause on that question regarding deep cleaning, because we are gonna get into this a little bit more with a real world example via our Q&A at the end. So hold tight on that and make sure that question gets answered. Our next hot topic is shutdown times. Adam?
So this one is also, there's questions everywhere on this. Why are people shutting down for a specific time period? And I think the first SOP, we reference each of these, and they're based on the CDC guidance at the time. So 14 days, you know, the infectious rate is between that 2 to 14 days. So that's the infection time frame that they've determined at this point in time through CDC. So the thought there is, if we go beyond that 14 days, we're at that point where the most infectious symptoms, the symptomatic individuals, the rate of transmission lowers over time. So you're at 14 days, and that's what a lot of public health departments have been recommending, is this 14 days. They also reference 72 hours and then 7 days. So the 72 hours is showing no signs, no fever or improvement of respiratory distress during that 3-day time period, and 7 days since the symptoms have appeared. So that's actually pulled directly in, if you look at the SOP 1 from the CDC guidance. And then the last one, if everybody, I'm sure, has kept an eye on what's going on with a plant out west, obviously Leprino, the time to clean and test. So how long is it going to take you to clean and to verify the effectiveness of your cleaning? I think the comment about what is deep cleaning, part of it is how long is it going to take you? How long is it going to take you to get back up and running? Do you have a third-party sanitation cleaning? Is it your group cleaning? So that's where some of these numbers, other numbers, have come in. So that's the current rationale behind those numbers. And I wouldn't doubt that at some point these might change because of new data coming in. But for now, this is where we're at.
All right, we're going to get into some practical applications of some of the information via Q&A. So these are questions from people participating in the meeting. We're not identifying who they came from. For those who might be joining us on the phone, I'm going to read each of these questions. Obviously, others can see this on their screen. First question, please detail how to deal with non-production areas, including locker rooms, bathrooms, break rooms, loading docks, in-house labs, and administrative offices. I want to note that we also had a question in chat from someone who noted, how frequently should common spaces be cleaned? Twice a day, every hour, every 20 minutes? So 2 questions here, one on sort of sanitizing and dealing with non-production areas, and then frequency of cleaning.
I mean, all those areas should be clean and sanitized, depending on what I don't know what each shift or how many shifts you're running in a particular facility. I mean, I've read and seen that they recommended 3 times in a shift that you should be cleaning those areas, clean and sanitizing those areas. So again, it's dependent on what the plant is doing and running in that particular facility, how many people they have, what are they running, you know, things like that. So if it's an area that's commonly touched by folks, you should probably clean it more often and sanitize it more often. Like I said, I've read up to 3 times during an 8-hour shift. If you deem that you need to do it more often, or if you have split shifts, you may want to do it more often. But again, you have to determine what you have going on in your facility to make it work.
And Marianne, you use the word sanitize, so sanitize instead of disinfect?
Probably should use disinfection too, yes.
Okay. there's maybe no overkill to cleaning if it's
Yeah.
possible.
No, you got cleaning, sanitizing, and disinfection.
We also have a question here. This is related to interaction. The question is related to the level of interaction an employee might have had with a suspected infected individual, either not yet confirmed or awaiting results. We haven't had cases in our county yet, but nearby there have been. Are employees okay to return if they're symptom-free? Isn't it possible they could be asymptomatic and bring it into our facility? So a couple of questions within that question, but I think to boil it down, is it okay for an employee to come to work if they're symptom-free, even if they've had interaction with someone who has a suspected case? And could someone asymptomatic bring it into the facility?
So the second question, isn't it possible that they could be asymptomatic, is yes. I mean, we're talking about this virus, and they've talked a lot about asymptomatic individuals being, or pre-symptomatic individuals, but the information on that is truly murky at best. I've seen everything on this. We really don't know how many people are asymptomatic carriers. We don't know how much they contribute to the disease transmission or how long the carriers are contagious. There were 2 studies done. One was more applied in China that had about 38,000 patients that were in close contact and were within the families. And the initial transmission rate among family members was about 10% during the initial outbreak, and it fell to 3% with implementation of mitigation practices. So both numbers in the study were lower than they expected, and that was within family close contact. Again, that's one study, so read into it what you will. But it seems that what has been common is that patients were most infectious at the onset of symptoms where they spiked the fever and started coughing. That has been shown in a number of studies. So that point where they go from pre or asymptomatic to symptomatic, and then their ability to spread infection dropped after that. That being said, they also found shedding can occur between 7 and 12 days beyond that, but it's less, the transmission rate was less. Then another study out of the University of Texas also found that people that didn't develop symptoms, around 10% of the case, had the same transmission rate, around 10%. So yes, it's possible, but at the same time, there are some steps we can take into place. An asymptomatic carrier, maybe with the use of a face mask reduces the risk from going from asymptomatic to pre-symptomatic. So that's a tough question because the second answer is yes. The reality is we don't know without additional testing where they're at on the spectrum. So that's, any thoughts there, Rebecca or Marianne? I mean, we've got a couple studies, but it's still evolving. We don't know how quickly, they jump from that asymptomatic to symptomatic stage. So.
I think, Adam, sorry, Rebecca.
No, please go ahead, Marianne.
No, I think you covered it, Adam, and there's really no good answer to that question. So I think we have some studies out there. We need more, yes. Will we have a better answer probably in the future? Yes. But right now we just don't know.
I think that's part of the reason why why this group within the SOP notes the importance of screening employees prior to them entering the facility, and there are many recommendations out there for the use of face masks to reduce transmission in the event someone has been in contact with someone who's got COVID-19 and are not exhibiting any symptoms at the moment. We'll get into this because we have a couple of other related questions here in Q&A as well. So here's a good question. If we require a health screening prior to entry for all employees and visitors, will regulators be allowed to submit to the screening? how do we ensure that we aren't putting our staff at risk if they refuse screening? So I wonder actually if John would like to field this question. We have been in contact with the, at least in Wisconsin, the Department of Ag, Trade, and Consumer Protection on this point.
Right, we are expecting within a few minutes, because we were expecting it yesterday, to get a reply from DETCAP that has a memo that will go out to each plant saying that they are going to comply with your requirements for a contractor entering the facility. So that I think is great, and it was some of our members too pressing for that from Department of Agriculture.
And I think just to build on that point, if you encounter any challenges to regulators submitting to health screenings, please let us know so that we might be able to help and intervene on your behalf, because as you saw in the SOP, it is recommended that everyone entering the plant submit to the same screenings. Moving on to our next question, can we get clarification on what to do if an employee is exposed, and a definition of exposed in relation to a cheese production facility? This harkens back to that other point, and I think I'm going to combine it with our next question because I think that they may be related. We are especially interested in best practices when an employee's spouse, roommate, or significant other works for a facility with a positive COVID-19 case, and or a facility that has been closed for 14 days for cleaning. Do we quarantine the employee? Recommend they schedule a televisit with a physician? So what we're really talking about with these questions are contact. At what point is an employee considered exposed? And what do you do when someone has been exposed?
I think the one point, somebody posted it on the website here, or in the chat box, the public health recommendations. That was a very good example, and it does talk about low, medium, and high risk exposure, first of all, and that will give you some guidance. Obviously, most dairy
Adam, you're
plants,
cutting in
I
and
won't say
out. Could
all,
you
but most
repeat?
that I've been
Adam,
in are,
could you repeat that? You're cutting in and out.
I'm sorry.
You're cutting in and out. Could you repeat?
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Yeah, give me 1 second. Okay, I will try again. Hopefully I do not cut out. If I do, I may not be able to answer, but the CDC, the reference in the Zoom chat box should take you directly to the recommendations that talk about low, medium, and high risk exposure. That's directly on the CDC website. So if you're in a larger plant that accommodates social distancing, your risk would be a little bit lower. If you're in a tight space, it's going to be, your risk is higher. When you look at the family situation, I pointed out those 2 studies from the data in China and conducted also by the University of Texas. The transmission rate was relatively low among family members, but there is still risk. So if the company would wish to have that employee actually wear a mask, if they are an asymptomatic carrier, it would protect those individuals around them and reduce the risk of exposure for them. Did that come through that time, Rebecca?
Yes, absolutely. We'll make sure that that link is shared to everybody who's been on this call in a follow-up email. It'll also be available on WCMA's website, so you can review that a little more closely, what is considered the highest risk and what is lower risk. We have heard anecdotally from businesses that have decided to move forward with policies related to direct exposure within a living situation. Some are asking their employees to stay home for that 14-day incubation period. Others are choosing to simply screen every employee as they would always. But it's important that whatever your policy is, that you're implementing it across the board and not in individual cases in that situation. Anything else from Mary Ann on this, or shall we move on to the next question?
I think you can move on back, Rebecca.
Great. Is the cheese industry requiring the completion of antibody testing prior to an infected employee returning to work? And is the cheese industry doing in-house testing of COVID-19 when concerns associated with potential contact arises? I think across the board, there isn't something that the cheese industry is requiring. It's more of an anecdotal situation, and I wonder if either Adam or Marianne would want to field that.
That's a relatively new test with the antibiotic testing, and we're still getting more and more information day by day about if the antibiotic testing is, should we do it, should we not do it, how can we utilize that information. You may have had COVID, looking at the antibiotics, but then you may get the COVID again later on down the road. So we don't really know much about the antibody testing right now. Is the cheese industry doing in-house testing for that? I've not heard of anybody doing testing for antibodies right now. It's something new. It's something that they're looking into. I know they're using some of this to treat, getting plasma from folks who had COVID and treating the people who have COVID right now with plasma with the antibodies in it. We don't know if that's working or will be working later in the future. It's so brand new. We really don't know all the answers to that yet.
Okay, I think we haven't heard either of those tests being implemented broadly across industry. Our final question that was sent in advance, is there a media statement to reassure our consumers that our foods are safe and our employees are well cared for? Who can we refer the media to if we get calls? I'm happy to work with any of you on the call today to make sure that you have a media statement that's available. We can certainly reference what the CDC has said and is noted in SOP 1, which is the risk of transmission via food is next to none. And there are many things that you can note that you're doing in your plants to ensure employee safety. Any of our 3 organizations are happy to take calls from reporters. In the event you receive them and you prefer not to answer them yourself, we all interact in an industry communications group, so we're all happy to take care of that if you'd like. Speaking of industry resources are available to you, I think that Adam detailed very significantly in SOP number 2 all of the many resources that are available online to you, not only through our 3 organizations, but also through state and federal agencies, and even some private entities as well. So please do take a look at SOP number 2 for even more, but we want you to know that each of our websites are updated regularly. Ours is updated daily with additional resources from state and federal regulators. We also include things that might help you inform your employees about policy changes or about best practices, or even things about, supporting their best mental health. Are there any other items that we want to cover in this webinar today? Ask that of Marianne or Adam. Otherwise, we'll have John wrap things up. Hearing none, we just want you to know that we're always available to you. Don't hesitate to call any of us at any time. You are going through challenging times, but you're not alone, and you have support through your trade association and through these other entities here to serve you. John, is there anything else you'd like to say before we bring this to an end?
Just to thank everyone, and I note that it might be interesting for us to put a template up for a media statement for people to take in and make their own, but it might be nice to put something up so we can hit everybody all at once.
Happy to take care of that. We can do that this week.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.